Another original healing presentation. Today we're going to discuss, my name is Rick Lee, and I'm going to be the one taking you through this very, very important topic. As you can see, we're talking about the educational blunder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church by applying for accreditation. Now, believe it or not, this issue very well can be, for a lot of people, a salvation issue. You see, we're talking about the shaking and the sifting. And we're going to bring a series of topics that has to deal with the shaking of God's people. And speaking of the shaking, you see here the shaking and the sifting. The investigative judgment we know began in 1844. Christ is in the most holy place, and him and the Father are going over the books, the records. Some names remain, some are taken out. Since 1844, this process began with the dead. And then, about the same time, or shortly thereafter, is what's called the preparation time for Seventh-day Adventists. You can see here, it's called the preparation before the latter rain, 5T, page 214. And it's also called the Lord's preparation. Right there, the Lord's preparation. August 31st, 1905, Review and Herald in early writings. So this time before the shaking is what's called the preparation time. If you're not aware of these issues in the Bible, these topics in the Bible, these doctrines in the Bible, then go to someone in your congregation that's a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned, ones who's eating meat, spiritual meat of course, and have them explain these issues to you, because these are very vital issues. You see, the shaking of God's people is a test that comes along with the mark of the beast, Sunday law. Okay, so the shaking, the sealing begins at this point and goes all the way over to saints being sealed. Now, some of these are overlapping. I'm not saying this is a chronological order, but it gives you an idea of the events that are to take place and are taking place now. Because in Sister White's day, she said the shaking had already began, and it is going to intensify until the passing of the mark of the beast. Now, it's interesting. Revelation 14 talks about the first, second, third angel's message. Have you noticed in Revelation 18, it begins with the second angel's message? Because when it goes out now, as it should be, but it's not, but when it goes out in the future, after the shaking, it's going to go to the world. God's people, God's Seventh-day Adventist people, and he has sheep of other folds that are going to be brought into the fold with the first, second, third angel's messages. But God's people, the time is here. It's our test. If you don't pass this test, you're going to be shaken out. So the shaking is very important for God's people. Yes, the papacy is important. Yes, Sunday law is important. And some people look for every news headline for Sunday law under every rock. The destruction of the Baltimore Bridge. Many theories have come out about that. And I'm not saying they're not important, but what I am saying is, are you preparing yourself to stand before a holy God without a mediator in the most holy? If you cannot do that, then those other issues are insignificant to your salvation. So we're going to talk about a series of shaking, and today's topic is accreditation. Now, let's take a look at why God raised up his people in Revelation chapter 10. We were raised for the sole purpose of giving the first, second, third angels messages. And those messages are supposed to go out to the world. But listen to this, Revelation chapter 3, verse 10. Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Now, if you would notice, that's the sixth church of the seven churches. That's the church of Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a crown. The seventh church, which this day and age we're living in, is Laodicea. It's not the first day churches, because when they rejected the Advent movement, the Advent message back in 1843 and 1844, they took a moral fall. And when they reject the messages in the future, her fall will be complete. It will be a spiritual fall. So this is referring to God's people. We have a crown if you're part of the Church of Philadelphia. Revelation, the Laodicean church, is going to be spewed out of God's mouth unless they return to the state of the Philadelphia church. So, I asked the meaning of the shaking. I had seen and was shown that it would be caused by the straight testimony called forth by the counsel of the true witness to the Laodiceans. So Jesus Christ, the true witness, is speaking to the church, the seventh and last church. This will have its effect upon the heart of the receivers and will lead him to exalt the standard and pour forth the straight truth. Truth. In the beginning was the Word. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Some will not bear this straight testimony. They will rise up against it, and this is what will cause a shaking among God's people. Early Writings, page 270.2. Believe it or not, there are some in God's church, remnant church, who's going to rise up against truth. Who would have ever thought? That Testimonies of the Minister, page 12. When the shaking comes, it will be introduced by false doctrine. So, in the beginning was the Word, and shortly after that, another word entered the universe, and that was Satan's word, challenging God's authority. And then coming to this world and saying to Eve, thou shalt not truly die. You see, there's two words out here. One is false, one is truth. And we want to make sure we're on the side of truth. In the future, Satan's deception will assume new forms. False theories clothed with the garment of light will be presented to God's people. Thus Satan will try to deceive, if possible, the very elect. Our watchword is to be to the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light or truth in them. Review and Herald, October 13th, 1904, paragraph 10. So let's find out how great this deception is going to be. So great is the deceptive power of Satan that many have been led to regard the atonement of Christ as of no real value. Review and Herald, March 8th, 1881, paragraph 4th. Does the Seventh-day Adventist Church deny the sanctuary? Deny the work that's going on in the sanctuary? The mediatorial work of Jesus Christ? You see, Christ's death on the cross was a perfect sacrifice. It was not the complete fulfillment of the atonement. To be one with God, the records have to be gone over. Some names removed, some names will stay, and the sanctuary has to be cleansed. Then an atonement will be made. So we have to know what truth is and seek out those who understand truth and not the new theology. The new theology is Satan's false doctrines. If If you need help with these issues, contact Original Healing. We'll be more than happy to study with you. So let's take a look at one of these modern day theories that have just recently come out that's rocking the Adventist church. Splitting churches, dividing churches. It's a book by Jonathan Leonardo. In his book, Love Reality, he states on page 19, I am not saying you will have a life where you will never sin again, or that you are going to have incremental victories over sin. The language of freedom is not incremental. Incremental language leaves the impression that this freedom is arduous, lifelong process of moral growth. Scriptures teach freedom from sin, and it is now. I live free because I have been given freedom from sin. Did you catch the contradiction? He's not saying you're not going to sin again, but yet he closes by saying you've been set free from sin. Either you have been or you're not. But let's take a closer look at it. In his statement of incremental, he's saying that there is no process of moral growth called sanctification. Sanctification is a daily work in the Christian life. Let's take a look at a paragraph on page 53. Righteousness is a free gift given by Adam. 2. It is his grace and his gift giving that overcame the realm of death that Adam once introduced into the world. It is not a work of a lifetime. It is simply a gift freely given because God is a gift giver. Now let's take a look at that paragraph. Adam did not introduce sin. Satan introduced sin in heaven. Secondly, check out this quote from the Spirit of Prophecy. The sanctification of soul, spirit, and body is the work of a lifetime. 10 letters and manuscripts. Manuscript 67, 1895, paragraph 5. Mr. Lardo's book totally does away with the sanctification process. Therefore, you don't need a mediator in heaven. Therefore, you don't need the sanctuary. Can you see where this is leading and has led? Because Andrews University, to my understanding, does not even teach the sanctuary message in their school of theology any longer. That's why we have books written like this. So, if there is one sin that God abhors upon another, of which the people are guilty, it is doing nothing in case of an emergency. Indifference and neutrality in a religious crisis is regarded of God as a grievous crime and equal to the very worst type of hostility against God. Now, I'm not saying we have to argue with people, but when we're in conversations, when we're in church and we hear error, we have a duty and a responsibility to vindicate God's honor. We have a duty to share with others, friends, families, the truth. To be neutral or indifferent to hearing error is one of the worst hostilities towards God. We have far more to fear from within than from without. The hindrance to strength and success are far greater from the church itself than from the world. Unbelievers have a right to expect that those who profess to be keeping the commandments of God and the faith in Jesus will do more than any other class to promote and honor by their consistent lives, by their godly example, and their active influence the cause which they represent. That's Review and Hero, March 22nd, 1887, paragraph 4. So folks, don't look at the papacy. Don't look at the Jesuits. Turn your eyes inward. What's going on inside the little building that you call a church? What's going on inside your own heart? Remember, there's a shaking time coming. All this I'm going to say to prepare us for the issue of accreditation. We have to understand what has taken place to understand why accreditation is not in your best interest, why it is a doctrine of Satan. So let's begin. The messenger of the Lord says, one thing is certain and soon to be realized. The great apostasy which is developing, increasing, and waxing stronger, and will continue to do so till the Lord descends from heaven with a shout. Now remember that quote. There's an apostasy that's taking place. It's getting stronger and will continue to get stronger until Jesus comes through those clouds. She's talking about God's people. There's an apostasy taking place. So, many will stand in our pulpits with the torch of false prophecy in their hands, kindled from the hellish torch of Satan. Can you trust your pastor? Because she says many. Do you know the doctrines well enough to know when the pastor is preaching error? We're in the last days. Remember the quote earlier that Satan is going to continue to bring forth his deceptions even more strongly. Satan is constantly pressing in the spurious, or the false, to lead away from the truth. The very last deception of Satan will be to make of none effect the testimony of the Spirit of God, which is Revelation chapter 19, verse 10. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Satan will work ingeniously in different ways and through different agencies to unsettle the confidence in God's remnant people in the true testimonies. Letter 12, 1980. So Satan's busy. He's trying to get you to believe a false doctrine. First, he has to move the shield of protection from you, which is the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. There will be a hatred kindled against the testimonies, which is satanic. The working of Satan will be to unsettle the faith of the churches in them. For this reason, Satan cannot have so clear a track to bring in his deceptions and bind up souls in his delusions if the warning and reproofs and counsels of the Spirit of God are heeded. Letter 40, 1980. Now don't get me wrong. Sister White said if God's people had been reading and studying the Bible as they should have been, there would have been no need for the testimonies. She also says the testimonies are the lesser light, shining upon the greater light, which is the Bible. So our position is the Bible. But the one who inspired men's hearts, holy men, to write the Bible, also moved upon Sister White to write the Spirit of Prophecy. Same author, the same spirit that moved upon human beings to write. It is Satan's plan to weaken the faith of God's people in the testimonies. Satan knows how to make his attacks. He works upon the minds to excite jealousy and disaffection towards those at the head of the work. The gifts are not questioned. Then, of course, they have but little weight, and instruction given through visions is disregarded. Next follows skepticism in regard to the vital points of our faith, the pillars of our position. Then doubt as to the Holy Scriptures. And then the downward march to perdition. You see what happens when you start not believing the testimonies? When the testimonies which were once believed and doubted and efforts till he launches them into open rebellion, which becomes incurable and ends in destruction. That's volume 4, page 211, and volume 1, page 236. By giving place to doubt and unbelief in regard to the work of God, and by cherishing feelings of distrust and cruel jealousies, they are preparing themselves for complete deception. They rise up with bitter feelings against the ones
who dare speak of their errors and reprove their sins. Volume 3, page 328, and 5T, page 672.1. So, this great apostasy, let's take a look what really set the foundation for it. But first you got to remember way back to 1888, the Minneapolis camp meeting, when the issue of righteousness by faith was introduced by Jones and Wagner, and the General Conference rejected that truth. So now let's take a look at what happened. Remember Sister White? The brethren sent her to Australia. 1901 she came back to America. This is from the 1903 General Conference Bulletin, page 150.12. But we have to realize that in 1901, this is 1903, in 1901, Sister White got the brethren to change the Constitution back to what it was in 1897 and 1901. But let's take a look what happened. The proposed new Constitution reverses the reformatory steps that were taken and the principles which were given and which were adopted as the principles of reorganization at the General Conference of 1897 and 1901, and which were incorporated in the Constitution of 1901. Remember, Sister White and her influence got the brethren to change the Constitution back to the 1897 and the 1901 Constitution. At that session, before the Constitution was officially adopted, this is the 1903 session now, P.T. McGann warned, "But I want to say to you that any man who has ever read Neander's History of the Christian Church, Mosheim's, or any other of the great church historians can come to no other conclusion but that the principles which are to be brought in through this proposed Constitution, and in the way in which they are brought in, and the same principles and introduced in precisely the same way as they were hundreds of years ago when the papacy was made." So in 1903, the General Conference president used the exact same principles and methods that the papacy was established. Remember that. What is the papacy? It is a hierarchical organization. So, let's talk about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We go to Revelation chapter 18, verse 8 through 10, and Revelation 18, the second and third angel's messages. These messages were to be given to the world. That's why we were raised up as a people. That is our work. If we're doing anything else except warning the world, bringing souls to Christ, we're not doing our work, folks. Revelation 13:16. So the question that has to be asked now is, are we doing, or do we have such an educational system that is preparing our young people to give these messages, to give this warning to the world? But you think about that thought for a minute. We're talking about accreditation. Let's take a look at the 55th General Conference session in 1990 has demonstrated the hierarchical nature of the church administrative structure. That's the South Pacific Union Recorder, August 4th, 1990, page 2. This is Neil Wilson, the former president of the General Conference, and the dad of Ted Wilson, the present General Conference president. The plain and undeniable fact is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is most assuredly not a congregational one, although it contains elements of congregationalism. but is clearly of the representative or hierarchical variety. That was your General Conference president at the time. And we know this to be true because this is a court case. The United States versus the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. Now, let's see what a judge has to say about that statement. Judge William T. Hart handed down a decision in favor of the Adventist Church and against Derek Proctor. He stated, church documents that prescribe the church's structure and governance confirm that all parts of the church are parts of a single entity. Next to the Roman Catholic Church, the Adventist Church is the most centralized of all the majority of Christian denominations in this country. Judge William T. Hart. Now, if you go back and read the history from about 1900 to 1905, Sister White warned against centralization of power. She called it kingly power. I don't have time to go into all that right now, but you have to understand that Sister White, way back in her day, saw the danger of the hierarchical structure. So, because of this, Sister White in her day wrote about Sabbath reform, dress reform, industry reform, education reform, and health reform. Concerning the medical reform, in the book Loma Linda Messages, she warned our brethren about becoming accredited. Many of the brethren back then wanted to be like the world. They wanted to be accredited so they can meet the world standards. And it's interesting, a gentleman from the Department of Education came out to Loma Linda and said, you guys don't need to be accredited. You're far superior than what we offer. But the brethren wanted to be like the world. They wanted to accept false doctrines. Now, it's sad, but true. In order to keep your accreditation standard, when the people come out to evaluate your school, they make recommendations. If you have all Adventist faculty, they might recommend that you diversify your faculty. If you have certain books in your library that are Adventist books, they might require you to diversify your library. If you have all heterosexuals on your staff, they may require you to allow non-heterosexuals on your staff. And the fact is, if you do not comply, they have the authority to remove your accreditation. And so that's really what our schools are up against, besides being a 501c3. So, Sister White asked this question in the book Education, page 228. What is to prevent our world from becoming a second Sodom? We all know all about Sodom, the lifestyle, the licentiousness that they practice. And as we look at our world today, homosexuality, the different groups, LGBTQ, and so forth and so on. And don't get me wrong, if they want to come into the church and accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, by all means, let them come in. Give them Bible studies. I want to read to you the congressional records, proceedings, and debates of the 87th Congress, 1962, concerning education, the second session. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or better known as UNESCO, a bill was introduced by James B. Hutt, R.H., Tuesday, September 4th, 1962. Paul Harvey, the radio commentator, commented on this bill. Paul Harvey stated, communism's trap for our youth. It was how certain material was coming into the American educational system from UNESCO through the Department of Department of Education, and trickled down to our educational system. So a lot of what you see going on today in the school system, which I'm going to show you some of it here in a minute, is right out of the playbook to destroy America. But let's get now to the accreditation issue. And how did that come about in the Seventh-day Adventist Church? You know, our schools were not always accredited. So, because the medical doctors in Sister White's day wanted to receive the accreditation or the world standard, it came in through the medical side. We are no longer single, no longer separate, no longer peculiar people. We have adopted the world standard. If morality and religion are to live in a school, it must be through a knowledge of God's Word. Some may urge that if religious teaching is to be made prominent in our school, we will become unpopular, that those who are not of our faith will not patronize the college. Very well then, let them go to other colleges, where they will find a system of education that suits their taste. Our school was established not merely to teach the sciences, but for the purpose of giving instructions in the great principles of God's Word and in the practical duties of everyday life. 5T, page 25.3. This is the education so much needed at the present time. If a worldly influence is to bear sway in our schools, then sell it out to worldlings and let them take the entire control. And those who have invested their means in that institution will establish another school to be conducted not upon the plan of popular schools. Popular schools mean the accredited schools, nor according to the desires of principals or teachers, but upon the plan which God has specified. 5T, page 25.4. I was shown the danger that threatened this important institution. If its responsible men seek to reach the world standard, if they copy the plans and methods of other colleges, the frown of God will be upon them. 5T, page 27.2. All this information is very vital to your and mine and our children's survival. This was taking place, and is in this book, Loma Linda Messages, which they actually burnt on the campus of Loma Linda University. Now, it was college. And this book, I believe, is no longer in print. I think it's very hard to get a copy of this book. Manuscript 164. God cannot endorse any institution unless it teaches the living principles of His law and brings its own actions into strict conformity to its precepts. The wants of the cause will continually increase as we near the close of time. Means is needed to give young men a short course of study in our schools to prepare them for efficient work in ministry and in different branches of the cause. We are not coming up to our privilege in this matter. All schools among us will soon be closed up. Volume 5, page 156, paragraph 2. So what did she say the reasons that our schools existed? To prepare the efficient work in ministry and the different branches of our cause. Is that happening? Are our schools struggling financially? Have we deviated from the blueprint? Shall we represent before the world that our physicians must follow the pattern of the world before they can be qualified to act as successful physicians? This is the question that is now testing the faith of our brethren. Let not any of our brethren displease the Lord by advocating in their assemblies the idea that we need to obtain from unbelievers a higher education than specified by the Lord. Revere and Herald, March 6, 1913, paragraph 4. So this was the issue that was testing some of our brethren. The issue of accreditation. Would we follow the world, or we would continue on the path that God had been leading his people? Now, if you cannot find a copy of that book, Loma Linda Messages, Vance Farrell put out a book, The Broken Blueprint. In this book, he goes over a lot of the same material that is in Loma Linda Messages. In that statement of the individual from the accrediting association coming out to the school and saying they don't need to be accredited is in this book. It's referenced. Read it for yourself. So, I'm going to share with you a sequence of events from 1926 to 1944. Please notice how the titles at large show with the people the crisis we were going through in education. The tragedy is that the great majority of our people did not sense the change that was actually taking place from week to week. This is only as we stand back now and put these particular articles before us, then we can actually see the change take place. Please follow, as I'm only going to read the main title in concerning education in leading Review and Herald articles beginning in 1926, 1927. Attending the university. Shall our schools come up higher? What further are some of the common worldly practices from which our institutions and our homes should be cleansed? So here in the school and in our homes, we were not living according to God's plan. Will our schools hold steady? Way back in 1929, the question's asked, will our schools hold steady? Less than 10 years after Sister White's passing away. So, this document right here is a private school survey form. This information in the survey will be used to determine the amount of funds our school will receive from the federal government's Title I program. They sent this information home with the students. That's how I got a copy of it. They're soliciting from the government funding. Shall we maintain our separation from the world and make the line of separation still more distinct? Take a look at this document. It's page 1 of 2, and I'm sharing it with you because on page 2, I want you to notice something. Quarter 1 comment. Good student, glad to be able to teach them. Pronouns, folks. This is a middle school. Because we solicit funding from the government Department of Education, makes us put forth these documents. Second quarter comment. Excellent student, glad to have her in class. Nothing wrong with that. Third quarter, a hard worker, A, does their best on every assignment. It's on its way in, folks. It's here. So let's continue with some more titles. A special message to our young people from our leading educators in North America. So, this is, let me go back a couple of slides here. Oh, there's there. Okay, there we go. Yes. This is where we're at. This is from Arthur Gibbs, Chief Advancement Officer, Corporate Secretary, Fletcher Academy. He sent these emails out to parents because North Carolina Opportunity Scholarship, March 1st, today is the last day to apply, now. So the state is offering to help just about every student enrolled in private schools for students who live in North Carolina. They're actually soliciting parents to get funding to put their children in their accredited institution. Let's continue with some more titles. Would Christ be accepted as a teacher in our modern schools? The passing of the church college. We went from a college, we wear big pants now. We're accredited. Why an accredited college? So, this is the federal government. Federal government support. From 1998 to 2003, Loma Linda University has received $167 million in federal funds. The number one academic recipient in the country, receiving nearly $60 million more than the runner-up. So Loma Linda University from 1998 to 2003 has received more than $60 million to the next runner-up. And we wonder why the things are taking place in our colleges, in our high schools, and in our middle schools, and in our grade schools. So, let's continue with some more. University degrees, November 4th, 1932. In the educational world, September 2nd, 1937. Worldly education in 3 parts. Part 3 is, be called rabbi. Be not ye called rabbi, for one is your master. January 25th, 1940. The Crisis of Education, December 12th, 1940. Let's continue with some more titles. Starvation by Philosophy. An alarming trends in the educational world. The changed character of Christian colleges by the editor, September 21st, 1944. So, Sister White said, the story is actually told just by reading the title of the articles. We are changing, we changed during those years. We're not the original people God raised up. Sister White had this to say, but divisions will come in the church. 2 parties will be developed. You have the original Advent movement, and you have the New Theology movement that has taken control of this organization. But there's 2 divisions, folks. So, we hope that there would not be the necessity for another coming out. While we endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace, we will not with pen or voice cease to protest against bigotry. Manuscript 30, 1889. Now, listen to this. This is very important. In the book, Last Day Events, the compilers make this statement. This is the only known statement from the pen of Ellen White indicating that she had lost confidence in the Seventh-day Adventist Church organization. The doubt which she expressed here was never repeated during the remaining 26 years of her life. Seriously. They had the audacity to write that. In less than 6 years, Sister White said, quote, I am instructed So who was she instructed by? To say that we must do all we possibly can for these deceived ones. Their minds must be freed from the delusions of the enemy. And if we fail in our efforts to save these erring ones, we must come out from among them and be separate. The Lord has made it very clear that if we continue to sit among them in hearing false errors coming from the pulpit, kindled from the hellish torch of Satan, we're going to pay a price, a serious price. During the following recommendation was made, I'm going back now to the accreditation issue. Also, other changes during Autumn Council of 1931. The following recommendation was made, quote, we further recommend that our schools do not publish the degrees of our teachers in the catalog, for it is very evident that this has a tendency to stimulate ambitious young people to seek advanced degrees, which to them might lead to a loss of their faith. Not only is there a danger to our teachers who attend these institutions for advanced degrees, but an ever greater danger in giving the idea to some young people that after all, it is a worldly education that counts. So, we're giving them a worldly education because we have become accredited. The very next year, 1932, the review of October 24th, 1932 states, we had a new recommendation, a revision if you please. The action of the 1931 Council was reversed. Some would say revised. Notice how it reads. We recommend that our workers generally avoid making unnecessary references to university study, advanced degrees, since this discussion manifestly has a tendency to stimulate ambitious young people to attend secular institutions of learning. It is still true, as Sister White wrote years ago, our schools should have little to say now of degrees or of long courses of study. It's Satan's plan and trap to get you in four-year college, graduate school, master's program, MBA program, PhD programs. That's all worldly secular education. Our school were raised up to teach the sciences, to train people to be efficient in ministerial lines, and the other branches of this organization, the medical missionary work, the publishing work, etc. And by the way, Adventist Health is not God's original medical missionary work. Once again, we're being deceived by the enemy. So, it is still true, as Sister White wrote years ago, our school should have little to say now of degrees or of long courses of studies. Nothing in the second, talking about the two comments by the editors, 1931 and 1932, nothing in the second one about the loss of their faith or the fact that they should not publish the degrees, but rather a softening of the issue. Quote, should make little mention of the degrees. Why? Because it might stimulate young people to attend secular colleges. Not to lose their faith, but to attend secular colleges. So the issue was that they might lose their faith if they go to these secular schools. But the issue was attending secular colleges. Suddenly, another interesting change that was brought out over the past few years of educational immaturity was in the form of a question. Would we permit Christ to head one of the theological departments in our colleges? Review and Herald 1930. The year 1930 to 1932 were key years for Seventh-day Adventist education. Here is the response from an editor to that question. Would we permit Jesus Christ to head one of our theological departments in our colleges? In answer To the question, the editor truly believes that our schools would welcome the great master, teacher, even though he came without worldly recognition or high scholastic attainment from the worldly schools. We cannot but believe that this brother's fears were unfounded, and yet it is proper for us to think of the future and to raise the question as to whether we will indeed continue to welcome Christ and his humble representatives to be instructors in our educational system. We think of some of the staunch leaders of this movement: James White, J. N. Andrews, Uriah Smith, humble men like the apostles, and yet opposing no high school scholastic qualification. Shall we be forced to reach the place in affiliation with the worldly standards where such men will be denied the privilege of instructing our youth in the ways of God? This is a sentimental appeal. It is not a simple practical consideration of possibilities, but we believe of not probabilities. So this editor was concerned that not even Jesus Christ would be able to teach in our accredited worldly institutions. But yet, we allow a Jesuit by the name of Samuel Bakioki to head the Department of Theology at Andrews University, molding and shaping the theological department for over 10 years. Now you understand why Andrews no longer teaches the sanctuary doctrine. Ten years later, a new editor talks about worldly education and makes this observation. Jesus carried no scholastic title, sad to say. Were Christ on earth today, he could not qualify as a Bible teacher because he would lack academic recognition. It would be said of him of old, as of old, how knoweth this man letters, having never learned? Review and Herald, January 25th, 1940. There is a document called the Branson Report, which was set aside or tabled, we should say, indefinitely. The doors have been opened to the field of medicine, and now the doors were open in the field of general education. The Branson Report was never released to the public. So, where is this accredited education leading us as a people? Please pay close attention. All that I said before was to bring out these points. Education in the formation of the beast and image. The early reformers found it necessary to have their own course of study, textbooks, teachers, methods and principles, etc. They separated themselves completely from the popular schools of the day. Requiring courage and faith in those days to take such a stand. And it will require even more courage and faith for those who are preparing for translation to take the stand which the testimonies are pleading for them to take. They knew that if their children would go to the schools where the popular education were given, they would receive the mark of the papacy or the beast. This is not a maybe. This is not could. She says they will receive the mark of the papacy. Anyone who has a knowledge of the third angel's message and who will take the trouble to examine the studies and methods of the popular system of education, the accredited system of education by the U.S. government's Department of Education, that was my little caveat right there. Anyone who take the trouble to examine the studies and methods of the popular system of education can see that the books are filled with those errors which will oblige those who are receiving their education from them to take a dreadful step which will bring upon the world a religious and civil darkness greater than ever had been before. Here we're talking about the time of trouble. So, let's continue. Complete separation. The command found in Revelation 18, chapter 18, verse 4, Come out of her, my people, means to come out from those institutions which will place in the minds of our young people principles which are apt to make them join the class of worshipers, of which we read in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. As faithful watchmen, we should be just as desirous of getting our children out of the popular schools as we are to call the older people out of the popular churches. The popular churches are only a product of worldly education. Is not the Seventh-day Adventist Church a product of worldly education? So to get at the root of the matter, we must separate ourselves from that which creates conditions in which all the religious world at present finds itself. PH 081, page 37.2. So, once again, she's talking about getting people, our children, our youth, out of these accredited schools, these accredited institutions. So, let's take a look at this statement. Wow. The Lord has a controversy with his professed people in these last days. In this controversy, men in responsible positions. So, who is God's professed people? And who are the that are in responsible positions? Yes, General Conference President, Executive Committee, Conference Presidents, Union Presidents, pastors. So, men in responsible positions will take a course directly opposite to that pursued by Nehemiah. They will not only ignore and despise the Sabbath themselves, but they will try to keep it from others by burying it under the rubbish of customs and traditions. Does your pastor go out to eat at a restaurant Sabbath afternoon? Are your children playing soccer, football on Sabbath, basketball on Sabbath? By the way, we're going to do a shaking on the Sabbath. In churches and in large gatherings in the open air, ministers will urge upon the people the necessity of keeping the first day of the week. Review and Herald, March 18th, 1884. So, this is Huntsville First Seventh-day Adventist Church in Huntsville, Alabama. Began offering a Sunday morning service called Surge Church. This service was promoted as a casual, come-as-you-are worship service. The 10 a.m. event aimed to attract unchurched community members, according to an article in LA.com, an Alabama-based media outlet. First Church senior pastor Debler Snell told the LA that the congregation communicated their intent to South Central Conference leadership, who allowed the service to proceed. The service will be offered for the first time this Sunday, February 8th, 2015, Spectre Magazine. So Seventh-day Adventist churches are now offering Sunday worship services. You see where this accredited education is leading our children, our youth? Are they losing their faith and trust in God?